Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Today, my guest is Brent Hensley, and we have a very near and dear topic. And so that's one of the reasons why I invited Brent. So Brent works with seniors. He helps people find like their assisted living, right? Whenever they get older and they can't live on their own anymore. So I'm going to let Brent introduce himself and talk a little bit about who he works with and how he helps people. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you, Alice. So my name is Brent Hensley, as she said. I'm with Assisted Living Locators, and I help families make the best senior care and living decisions. So what does that mean? As our senior loved ones get older, there's a whole cycle of care needs that they have, beginning with staying at home, and family caregivers are caregiving with them, and sometimes that gets too much. So bringing in outside caregivers to help support them. It could be time where living at home is just no longer an option. So looking at assisted living, or in the case of dementia and Alzheimer's diagnosis, looking for memory care. So think of me as sort of your guide in leading you through that entire process as your senior loved one ages.
And one thing that Brent failed to mention is that you don't charge people, right, Brent?
That's right. My services are no cost to the families that I work with. I love this model. In my industry, I'm actually compensated by the community that we ultimately find for the senior loved one. With that said, I'm completely neutral. Think of me as Switzerland. I work with all communities. I don't have an affiliation with one or the other. My job is to, based on the care needs, budget, search criteria that my client has, to find the very best choice.
And you don't just find like the very best choice, you actually go with the people to go visit these places, right? You're sort of like giving the white glove service that some people need.
I hold their hand through the whole process. I do a really thorough intake with them, usually via Zoom. And then once I come back to them with several choices that I think are the best fit, that have inventory. And then I actually will do a tour schedule and accompany them on the actual tours. And the reason for that is when families tour for the first time, it can be a very overwhelming experience. There's a lot of emotion. So I'm there to not only introduce them to the community, usually the sales director is the person giving the tour, but also capture their reactions, pros and cons, just be there to ask questions on their behalf, things they might not think of. So yeah, it's sometimes I do 3 tours in a day with the family, and it's a lot to absorb.
And for those of you who don't live in the area, if you contact Brent can always refer you to someone else in his organization who works in different geographical areas as well. So he's helped me with my father, who lives in Columbus, Ohio. Even though Brent is here in the Bay Area, he was able to help me and connect me with the right person.
Yeah, it's great. At Assisted Living Locators, again, we're a national franchise and we have locations all over the country. So if you are looking for a loved one in another area of the country, I can certainly connect you to a professional just like myself that can also give you that white glove treatment.
And Brent does a very thorough intake, as he mentioned. I went through the process myself with my dad. And so thanks, Brent, for being on the show. And I'm really excited to get started with our topic, which is really what kind of tips can you give people who are dealing with a loved one who has Alzheimer's or dementia, and we're trying to negotiate something with them. More often than not, the negotiations, and I'm speaking from personal experience, are stuff like negotiating to get them to go to the doctors or to take the medication, or to exercise, or a number of things that they may not be doing that they should be doing, or that they are doing that they should not be doing. And so, because of the dementia, I find it very difficult to use typical negotiation strategies to get them to comply, because they're not, their executive functioning is not the same as it was before. So, Brent, I'd love for you to just chat with us a little bit about, that demographic and how can we negotiate better with them.
The biggest piece of advice I think I would give to anyone dealing with a loved one with dementia is don't try to use logic and persuasion as part of your tactics to conversate and negotiate with your senior loved one. It simply doesn't work. I see it all the time. And no, there's not a handbook. I had to learn this through personal experience. My mother-in-law has dementia. And so, it's not about getting it right, but, using all the information you can along the way. And so people think that if I can try to communicate what the truth is to you and my perception, that it's somehow going to help the senior with dementia. Like me shining the light on what is actually going on. All that happens is you get really annoyed, they get flustered and really push back even more, more agitated. So there's some tactics that I can go into later in the conversation, but first of all, we're not dealing with a normal negotiation. We're dealing with someone that has a very different reality. It's their truth. So logic and persuasion doesn't work.
So I'm curious. So what ways, since we're not using logic and persuasion, what should we be doing? Like, how should we be approaching someone, especially someone who, unlike someone who is easily complies, for those people who we're having difficulty with compliance, that they just simply don't want to do the things that we want them to do?
Okay. So there's a lot of different scenarios. I'm going to just go through a few of them. So one tactic is validation. So instead of trying to push back and say, no, your perception or your feelings are not valid, acknowledging what they are, where they are at that time. So I've done this a million times with my mother-in-law. So, and with dementia, a lot of times they will not remember that they've eaten. And so they could have just eaten a huge meal. And then 20 minutes later, I'm hungry. So the normal reaction is, hey, what do you mean you're hungry? You just ate. But I'm hungry. Well, there's no way that you could be hungry. And here's what we ate. Does not work. So being with, oh, okay, you're hungry. Okay, well, if you could have something to eat right now, what would that look like? What would that be? What are you hungry for? Just get into their world and not have the very first step as negate what their experience is.
So how does that conversation continue? So let's say that you ask, what would she want? And she says, well, I would like some pizza. Do you actually go through and are you trying to use whatever strategies to get her to come around to the point where she no longer is requesting food? Or do you have the conversation and eventually feed her again?
No. So the point is not to have her realize that she just ate and not eat. The point is and this is the next tactic, redirect. So you want to gently guide the conversation to something else. And that's, there's challenges with dementia, but one of the easier parts of it is they don't have the same perception of time. So it's very easy to get them distracted to the next thing. So so I see this in the memory care communities that I work with all the time. So they'll wake up in the morning, then they'll say, Mr. Jones, it's time for breakfast. Let's go to breakfast. I don't want breakfast. Okay, no problem. They'll go help another resident, come back 5 minutes later, and they'll say, hey, do you want to come and watch your friend Christine eat pancakes with the other residents? Oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. So you're still getting them to come out and join and probably eat breakfast, but you have just redirected to another thought that will interest them. and they have forgotten about the very first conversation anyway. So that's one tactic. Redirecting is really important when caregiving.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen that being used sometimes with my dad as well because he's been suffering from dementia, and like I just went to go visit him, and we said, "Oh, do you want some cake and ice cream?" And he said no, and it wasn't so much a redirect as we just served it, and then he ate it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. There's every senior is different in terms of their personality, where they are in their dementia journey, how quickly the dementia has progressed. So these are just suggestions. You have to find what works for your senior at the time. Now, next week, these tactics might have to be revised because their dementia might be different next week.
Right. So you kind of it keeps you on your toes, right?
Definitely.
And so let's say that you need them to go somewhere. Like, let's say this happens frequently. So I'm bringing up real life examples. So there's a doctor's appointment and we have to get them ready to go to the doctor's appointment. And so, it can't be something that we come back in 5 or 10 minutes because literally there's an appointment. And in our scenario, there's a fee, a cancellation fee attached if there's a no show. Right. So one of the things I would imagine is we can get started way earlier. So what happens if they're like, yeah, I'm not going to go. I'm not in the mood. What are some things that we could do?
Um, they're framing the choice, for example, giving them options and saying, "Hey, when we get after we go to the doctor's appointment, let's go get some ice cream after our appointment. It's your favorite ice cream place." That could be a tactic. You when making the doctor's appointment, you could tell them, "Hey, do you want to when we go to the when we go visit your doctor, would you rather go in the afternoon or the morning?" Instead of we have this appointment, you're giving them some leeway or some choices. Whether they remember that or not when the doctor's visit actually comes around, I don't know, but you're empowering them in the decision. So giving them, even though it's small choices, is, I think, important.
One of the things that my mom started doing, I'm not sure that it worked or not, is when he agreed, she videotaped him agreeing. Because she
Yeah.
said, well, let me see if I show it to him because he didn't have any recollection of agreeing. And so she had filmed him previously when he said, I agreed to go. And so she's like, she was trying to recreate his memory using like a video. So I'm not sure that I have to ask her because I don't know that that actually worked or
I
not.
I have a feeling that it probably normally doesn't because I have seen where, like in the case of, it's I'm cold. Well, it's 85 degrees outside. You show your phone. Look, this is the temperature. Having proof whether he said that before or not, they won't accept that. They'll like, well, that wasn't me, or I never said that. So having in our perception real proof generally doesn't work.
So in this, okay, so if they say I'm cold and it's 85 degrees, would you suggest that you just give them the blanket and say here, or do you like pretend like they're putting a blanket on them? Like what are some of the strategies in that particular scenario?
Yeah, I mean, you could just say, "Oh, okay. So you're cold. Do you have enough clothes on? Do you want to put maybe another jacket on?" Like, or you redirect. "Oh man, okay, you're cold. Like, what do you normally do when it gets cold? What are your favorite winter weather clothes to wear?" Again, trying to get them off the conversation of "I'm cold" to something else, but make it related to that topic. So really just getting their mind off of whatever that is. I'm not suggesting that if it's 85 degrees that you put a winter coat on them. That would probably not be healthy, but not negating what they're saying and then redirecting to something else generally will have them stop talking about being cold.
Got it. So basically acknowledging their reality and then redirecting the conversation either to a slightly different topic but related to that so you're not suddenly changing like significantly. So slowly redirecting it from that topic, maybe still talking about that topic but getting off of whether they should put it on or not, but say like what are some of the things that you like to do when you're this cold, or where would you like to go? Like if it's too
Hmm.
cold, like that kind of thing where you're still talking about that topic, but moving a little bit off of whether they're cold or not, or whether they want a blanket or not. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So that's where I don't want to say it's an advantage, but the nature of dementia and their attention span is fairly short, and of course their memory span is very short. So it doesn't take a lot for them to forget that they were actually talking about being cold. And again, to really focus in their world. In their world, they are cold. So telling them that they're not, well, whatever logic that you have is in my opinion not respectful to them because they are cold in their world. So just pivoting to a new topic and redirecting to something related generally can make a difference.
Now, I want to share something that we've noticed, and I don't know that you have any feedback for this particular thing, but I've noticed that with my father, even though he has no short-term memory and so frequently forgets things, it seems a lot of times that he remembers his emotional state. Meaning, we had him in the hospital and he really, really desperately wanted to get out. He did not want to be there. He didn't want to be attached to all the IVs. And so he kept saying, I want to go home. I want to go home. And no matter what we tried to do, no matter like how we tried to make him forget, like we would say all kinds of things and he always remembered that he wanted to get out. Like there was no way to get him to forget or get redirected, because he'd always say, when are we going home? When are we and this was like ongoing for like days. So we're like, maybe an emotional state will make him just stay there. I don't know. We were very much at a loss as to like how to redirect him because he was just kind of like glued onto that topic, you know?
I think a really interesting question you could have asked the other people there is he saying that all the time, or is he only saying that when he sees you, when you come to visit? Because oftentimes the family, when they come to visit, that's what triggers the memory that they're actually not at home. So most of the time they're not, because it causes the family a lot of angst. Like, oh my gosh, my dad is sitting in the community all day thinking he misses home and he misses us. That may not be the case. It's just that when you visit, that triggers the memory and then he says it in a repetitive fashion. So I see this a lot with when there's a married couple and one of the spouses, excuse me, has dementia or Alzheimer's. The spouse has to put the other spouse into memory care, and they feel so much guilt and so much angst. And so when they go visit, that cycle begins like, oh, when are we going home? And I often, at least at the beginning of the transition, will recommend that my client actually stay away at the beginning to give them time to acclimate, get used to not that division between home and being in the community, and then try after that transition has happened, then try to incorporate visits. Now, that same emotion might come up, but we want to not torture ourselves to think that our loved one is constantly thinking that 24/7.
Interesting. So that's very similar to children. So when we first bring our kids to preschool or kindergarten, the separation moment is always highly stressful for everyone involved, and they always tell the parents, "Just please leave," so that the kid can calm down and acclimate to the new surroundings. Because as long as the parents are around, the kid is screaming and crying and freaking out. So it's very, very similar, I think, to like a younger child, right?
Right. Well, there are some similarities, but at the same time, this is a grown adult with life experiences, and so a lot of the strategies in negotiating with them really have to be grounded in respect. Always making sure that you are respecting their feelings as valid and and that they feel that they're part of the decision making process, whether or not that they really are. But I just find that respect, because a lot at the beginning of the beginning stages of dementia, it's the mental anguish that seniors go through when they start. It's a gradual process, right? They start can't find their words, or they start realizing, okay, this is getting serious. And then they think, oh my gosh, am I going to be such a burden on my family? All of these things occur. And then like I've seen it where a senior who is very outgoing starts to go inward because they can't find their words and they don't want other people to realize that's happening. And so they start being very insular. And so it can change a senior's personality. So there's a lot going on in the brain of a senior as the dementia progresses to protect themselves. And so that's why I always say, give them as much respect and dignity as they can as they go through that journey.
That's great, Brent. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. What are some of the other strategies that we can employ when we are dealing with people with dementia or Alzheimer's?
Well, there's another one that I think we all know, and this, I think you brought up the children's parallel, but this works with dementia, seniors with dementia as well. As I call it therapeutic fibbing. So telling them little stories that might reduce their anxiety, really small things that really don't matter, fabricating some facts. My mother-in-law has a really big thing about people liking her. I don't know if that's from her childhood or whatever. And so anytime I would comment about something about the day or she's actually in a memory care community now, I would always pepper in, oh, the caregiver there really likes you. She said, what a nice lady that you are. And that would always bring a smile to her face and always like, that's great. Did she really say that? Yes. So of course it's not true, but at least it gives her a feeling of security and reduces her anxiety. So that's one tactic that I think is really easy to incorporate.
And so if we were to, for example, so one of the things that's been a difficult negotiation piece for us is when I go into town, right? Because I'm coming from Oakland and they're in Ohio, we try to go out to dinner. So it might be just like once during the visit. And it's always like, oh, are we going to be able to get dad out of the house? Because he might agree earlier in the day. By the time it's time to go, he might say, I'm not going anywhere. And suddenly, like, the entire family reunion where we're all going and he's supposed to be there with us starts to fall apart. And so do we do the thing where it's like, hey, we're going to go out and afterwards we're going to do A or B? Because frequently he'll just say, I'm not leaving the house. And so it doesn't matter like what we put in front of him as choices. He's like, my choice that I'm making is I'm not going anywhere. And so I'm wondering if you can give me any kind of like advice on how to deal with that if we're giving him choices to say, we can stay for a short time or we can stay for a long time. He's just like, I'm not going to get dressed. I'm not going to
go. When your dad has consented to leave the house, what has been his motivating factor? Is food something that would motivate him?
Yeah, so it's usually food, and that's the reason why we try to get him out just to go eat, because that is a motivating factor. But then sometimes he's just sort of like decides that he's not in the mood to go eat because he's not hungry or something like that. So then he just declines. And then it makes it a very bad experience for everyone involved because we were all there's like 9 of us going out at the same time.
So if you're just trying to get him to go out of the house, you could say, hey, they're going to have, we either can go eat your favorite food at a restaurant and then in tandem with that, trip, we're going to stop by after the fact and go to this family reunion or whatever the case, but entice him with something outside of the house in tandem with what you want him to do. Now, your dad sounds like a tough case. I mean, not every tactic is going to work. If they're, adamant that they're not leaving the house, sometimes you can't have them leave the house. It's a no, it's a no-go. But you can test what tactics work, what tactics don't, and to read your dad when enough is enough. We've tried every tactic. Let's just leave him alone. But just a suggestion.
And I know you're not an expert on this, Brent, but I'm going to ask you this funny question. So is it an unfair thing to entice him to go out to a restaurant and then redirect and go to the doctor's for a doctor's appointment?
I guess it depends on what you call unfair or define unfair. you're getting him to go to the doctor's appointment because he truly needs to be his care, overseen. So in whatever way you can make that happen, because it's for the overall care for your dad, then I say you have to do it. Um, I have seen it where families consent to not having having the senior not go to the doctor, because and also another thing about going to the doctor is the senior with dementia is afraid that when they go to the doctor, first of all, it's an unfamiliar environment. They have to navigate different people, different noises, different setting, everything, and that's confusing to them. But what happens when they go to the doctor and that doctor says, hey, your dementia's gotten worse, hey, this is happening, and that's so confronting. They would rather not know any of that. So staying at home prevents them from knowing any negative knowledge about the progression of dementia or any of their other health concerns. So I don't, sometimes it's not fair, but you're advocating for your senior loved one and what's best for them.
Right. Or maybe we just, take them to the doctor and then go out to eat, right? We just don't mention that we're going to the doctors, because it was quite a contentious thing to try to get him to go. So, these days we don't have to worry about it because he's in hospice and it's at home. So he's at home and he doesn't have any more doctor's appointments to go to. But that was definitely something that was very, very difficult to negotiate.
One strategy I actually have seen where a senior, because with dementia, they can isolate more and more and more and not ever want to leave the home, is I had a client that had a caregiver that she really had bonded with. And so this senior desperately needed to see your primary care physician. So the primary care physician was willing, the doctor that she had was willing to actually do a house call. So we had it so that the caregiver said the primary care physician was part of the caregiving team and just wanted to ask her, the senior, some questions. So it convinced them that it was a safe environment, and she allowed the doctor to come into the home under the guise that it was part of the caregiving team.
Oh, interesting. Yes, I feel like these matters are very important and yet very tricky, right? Because a lot of it is really important for their health, for their well-being, and to not be able to get them to agree with the caregiving that they need, I'm sure is very stressful for a lot of people, especially the people who are the main caregivers. Is there anything else, Brent, that you can share with those of us who have to deal with that?
An easy one, I think, is tone and body language. Just always, for my mother-in-law, a reassuring tone. Again, not arguing and not talking against her reality, but always reaffirming, saying over and over, everything is fine, and having that tone. She is very reactive to touch, so always having the touch factor, rubbing her back. That is also can be very reassuring to a senior with dementia. So figuring out what their sort of love language is and how they react to body language and the types of words that you can use when interacting with them, I think can also be really beneficial.
I love that because, tone is something that everyone really needs to be cognizant of, even in regular negotiations, right? Outside of even patients who have dementia. If you are showing up with a warm and calm tone, that energy is infectious, right? It goes to the other person. And so I think that what you're saying is that by using a calm tone, you are making sure that they don't get stressed out and that their amygdala does not get triggered. And when I speak about amygdala, for my listeners who aren't familiar, amygdala is what basically makes you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And you can't really access your executive functioning, your logical thinking part of your brain, because it's all frozen. So you don't want to get your loved one who's a senior citizen with dementia all worked up and freaked out, because they might just shut down and not respond at all, or maybe just argue back and not really think about anything, right, Brent?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's, I guess, the biggest difference in this negotiation framework is it's not about winning. You know, when you coach your clients, you're trying to get what you want. You're trying to win the negotiation. In this, it's really about ensuring the safety, the dignity, having the best quality of life. And so it's a very different kind of goal going in. I would say the three words are patience, flexibility, and empathy. If you can focus on those three ideals and goals when interacting with your seniors with dementia, I think you're off to a great start.
That's awesome, Brent. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about patience that you mentioned. It's the same thing with little kids. You have to have patience. And so anytime, and I'm speaking now from a parent's perspective, someone who's raised small kids, my kids are a bit grown now, is that you can't really do anything when you're short on time. Because if you're short on time, then you're rushing. You actually don't have patience anymore because you're short on time. And then everything starts to blow up. And so you want to make sure if you're going to have a conversation where you're trying to convince your loved one of doing something or going somewhere, that you have enough lead time to give yourself patience to be able to give them patience. Because if we're under the gun and we're going to be late, suddenly you're freaking out, you might be angry, you might be stressed, and then you're going to stress them out, and then all of that starts to unravel in a very bad way.
Yeah, time is probably the number one reason that I see, because a lot of families kind of go with the philosophy that it is the family's job, obligation, and duty to, and it's for the best for the senior to provide the caregiving. They don't want to go into memory care. They don't want to know assisted living or even really resist having a caregiver come into the home. But the biggest reason for burnout is they don't have time. They have their normal lives. They are trying to do a million different things. And when you don't have a lot of time and resources and you're running out of patience to deal with your senior, that's when you're not at your best. And so that time factor is huge. And unfortunately, with the dementia, with a dementia and Alzheimer's diagnosis, the progression only gets worse. And so the amount of time that you need to devote to the care of your senior only increases. And a lot of families are just not prepared. They're caught off guard when the care needs go really up suddenly, which can happen. And so, yeah, that time piece is a big factor.
So I have a question talking about that, Brent. So from your perspective, as someone who helps people move into assisted living, is it usually the senior themselves that need to be negotiated, like that I would negotiate with my parent to say, hey, you really need this? Or is it the adult children who need the convincing? Like, who usually do you need to negotiate with to say the best thing right now is for this person to move into assisted living?
Most often, it's definitely the seniors. I primarily work with children of the seniors. Most of my clients are at a point where, unfortunately, they've been living at home. Something bad has happened. Maybe there's a fall or a cognitive decline. And so the kids call me and say, hey, this isn't working anymore. And so they get it that mom and dad can't keep on the way that things are going at home. So they already understand by just the nature of calling me. I would say 90% of the seniors that I work with they don't want to leave their home. And I understand that. Like, you should live at home as long as you safely can. And I totally understand that. However, part of what I do is trying to integrate the senior into the decision-making process and have them understand, assisted living can be a really nice environment. You can meet people like yourself. They have nice food. The apartment is nice. They have nice activities. So try to help them understand assisted living is not a terrible place. And B, it's a supportive environment that you really need. So yeah, a big part of my job is to help kind of convince the senior that this is in their own best interest. And I don't know what it is, but there's human nature around we don't listen to our own families like we do to outsiders. So I often have to come in and play bad cop and saying, this is what, as a professional, this is what I'm recommending. And oftentimes they listen to me more than they actually listen to their kids. So it's just kind of a fact of life. But yeah, there's a lot of negotiation on the seniors' part.
Yeah, what's the phrase? Familiarity breeds contempt.
Exactly.
Especially when it's coming from your children. But so, I know this is like slightly off topic in terms of negotiating with people with dementia. However, it is still on the topic of negotiation. So I understand, Brent, what you said, which is like most of the time you have to go in and do the heavy lifting to negotiate with the families, I should say the parents, right, of adult children, to convince them as to why they should move. But what are some tips that you can give to people who've got aging parents and need to negotiate with them to try to convince them? I understand that most of the time they're not going to listen because it's their kids. But what are some of the tips that you could give them to help the negotiation process, maybe even before you show up so that you're not doing all the heavy lifting?
I mean, well, when they're actually talking to their parents, one tactic that I've used is having a respected figure of authority, whether it's a pastor at a church, their family doctor, something, give their opinion about the safety of them remaining at home. If the doctor says, you know what, due to your cognitive decline or your mobility decline, it's really in the setup of your home, we really think that it's not safe for you to remain at home. So you should really consider assisted living. So having a trusted outside authority give their input could be one step. Also, when I actually get involved, one of the big things that I will do is most of the time seniors don't understand what assisted living is. So I just want them to say, okay, hey, will you come have lunch with me? I'll pick a community that I think is a good fit. We'll have a great lunch. Maybe they'll have live music the time that we go. And the senior is like, oh, okay, I see other people like me. So just even dipping their toe in the water of having them consent to even visit a community is often a big first step.
That's great. So it's basically just if you think of a beach, you're just easing your toes in the water. Let's go have a little like dip, and we don't have to go jump in our entire bodies into the cold water. Let's just have a feel for it. So maybe just having the adult children say, you know what, I'm not asking you to commit. We're not asking for anything, but let's just go check it out just for information.
Right. Yeah. I always want my clients to come to me before there's a real sense of urgency, just because that limits the choices, the expenses going into assisted living. So get educated. What are the options? What are the different communities that could provide the care that they need, and have that in the conversation well before the senior actually gets to that point that they actually can't live at home anymore.
Now, I understand, having gone through this process myself with my dad, I noticed that there's like hesitancy to say, oh, well, if we're not ready now, or we're not ready to move now, my mom was like, let's just like pause this whole thing, right? She wants to go. So, for people who are listening to this podcast, typically, Brent, what is the time frame from the time that you start looking till the time that, or is there even a time frame? Because I know my mom said, well, we're going to pause because we don't need one now. So she didn't even want to do the research, because she was like, let's save the research when and if I actually need that information. So how do we get past that barrier if I want her to have information prior to actually needing it?
I always tell my clients the best time for assisted living is before you need it. And that is absolutely true. So, yes, seniors will, a lot of times they're in denial of their situation. So their perception of what they actually need is not, really in reality. So the children actually driving the research is, I think, really important. And so again, we're talking about, hey, let's entertain the idea of some communities. And we want to do this not because you need assisted living now, but so that we're not caught off guard. Every single day I get a call for someone in that same situation that they let the senior drive the cadence of the search, and it always ends up in the same thing. You get a call, there's been a fall, there's been something bad that's happened, and then we scramble to actually find a community for them, because sometimes they can't go home. So as the children being the guide in, okay, let's do the research up front. Of course, the senior is not going to think that that's necessary, but it actually is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brent. If anyone is interested in working with you, they've got an aging parent or loved one who they need your help with, how can they reach you?
They can reach me on my website at www.assistedlivinglocators.com/San Francisco. They can reach me by email, brenth@assistedlivinglocators.com, or by phone, 415-766-0361.
Thank you so much for joining us, Brent, and thank you so much for all the tips that you've given my listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, listeners, again for listening to another episode of Negotiation with Alice, and we will see you next time.